Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a type of video that I don't normally do, but because we're coming up on fall, my favorite season, obviously. I feel like I talk about it too much. I'm sorry, I say it in like every video. But I wanted to do a video full of some of my favorite fall books, my fall book recommendations, basically just books that I think you should read this fall season. So I have this broken into some basic categories. Obviously I have adult, YA, middle grade, and then I also have quite a few graphic novels, which I love for this season as well. So hopefully there's something in here for everybody. Let's just get into this. I have like some cozy books, some atmospheric books, some books that maybe are a little bit more catered towards October and Halloween, just kind of everything. So I'm going to get into it and I really hope you guys enjoy and maybe find something that you would like to pick up. So first I'm going to start out with my adult books, the first recommendation being Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. This is a book that came out last year, and when I first read it, I don't really think I was like that obsessed with it. I don't think it really made much of an impact on me in any way, but here's the thing. I think about this book frequently, like with some frequency. I think about this book, I think about the characters, I think about the general atmosphere that Alex E. Harrow was able to craft in this book, and it's just so different and unique to anything that I've read before. Because this is kind of a haunted house type story that follows our main character Opal, who lives in Kentucky, I think, in this very old town that has a very kind of questionable history to it. And Opal is honestly really struggling. She's about 26, but she has to care for her young brother who is going through high school, I think, at the time. She ends up working at this mansion in the town that's called Starling House, and it is run by this kind of outcast guy whose name is Arthur, and he's been very much ostracized by society. Like, everybody thinks he's weird, nobody wants to talk to him, be near him, associate with him in any way, but Opal really needs money, so she ends up kind of caring for Starling House. And as the story unfolds, you get a little bit more background on this house, which I thought was fascinating, because back in the day there was this author that used to live in this house called E. Starling, and she wrote this really unsettling and unnerving children's book that Opal has been obsessed with her entire life. And through working at this mansion, she kind of sees the influences that were put into the story, and the way that the story unravels and the way that everything comes together was just so fascinating to me. I also just really loved the overall vibe to the story, because while it is like spooky and scary, it does have this underlying kind of gritty tone to it, which I just really loved, and I haven't read anything like it before. And I feel like the more that I think about this, the more that I want to reread it someday, so I just really enjoyed this. Next up is a book that I'm sure you guys have heard of, but this is one of my favorite books to read in the fall, and I don't know if that's because I initially read it in the fall, but it's a book that I very much associate with fall, and I feel like you might too. And that is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I think the main reason I also associate this with fall is because part of it does take place at a university, because this book is following our two main characters, Victor and Eli, who for their like final research thesis project kind of thing are trying to prove the existence of EOs, which are extraordinaries, who are basically a group of people that have suffered near-death experiences, but through them almost dying, they end up with some sort of ability. They kind of read a little bit like superheroes almost, which is something that I am normally not into. I do not enjoy superhero type things, but this book was just so interesting, and it's such a unique concept that I haven't really read in a book before that I was just enamored with it from page one when I first read it. I also reread it last year and I absolutely loved it my second time through. This is one of my favorite books of all time, so I implore you to read this if you haven't. I honestly think this is V.E. Schwab's best work. Like, I love all of her other books, but if I had to choose a favorite, it would be Vicious. Like, just this one, not even the second book in the series. I don't love the second one in the series. Granted, I haven't read it in a couple of years, but like, this book is so good. The dynamic between our two main characters is so addictive to read about because they hate each other, but they are absolutely obsessed with each other. I also love the moral grayness of our characters as well, because they kind of fall into certain archetypes of like the good guy and the bad guy, but like as you read, you kind of see that that's not the case. And I just love everything about this book. It's so good. So I would obviously highly recommend. The next book is a book that I read last year. It is a dark academia staple, but I am obsessed with it, and that is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I did a whole video where I read dark academia books last year, essentially for the first time, because I have read The Secret History. I read it back in 2020. I didn't love it. I feel like maybe I want to try and reread it at some point. Maybe I would appreciate it a little bit more on a reread. But at the time it wasn't my favorite. But then I picked up this book and I was like, hold on now, like this is so good. This is following a group of 5 characters that go to a liberal arts college and they are studying Shakespeare. They are very, very into Shakespeare. I want you to know that right now. If you are not okay with them quoting Shakespeare all the time, talking about it, studying it, performing it, don't pick this up because you're gonna hate it. But even as somebody who has never really delved into some Shakespeare, I read like bits and pieces of plays for English class, obviously, as one does. Even though I'm not super familiar with it, I still absolutely love this. So I can't even imagine what my reading experience would be like with this book if I was like familiar with those texts. But even without that background context, I still absolutely loved this book and I ate it up. Basically, the beginning of this book follows one of the characters in this group of 5, 20 years later maybe, and he's just getting out of jail for the murder of one of his classmates. But we find out, I think right off the bat, that he's not the one that did it. So the entirety of this book really follows these students as we are building towards this event of one of their classmates being murdered. You can definitely tell the tensions are running high. The dynamic between all of the characters in this group is so complex and very interesting. And I also just love the way that Shakespeare is used to kind of portray how our characters are feeling without them outwardly saying it. Like, you can learn where characters are with each other just by watching them perform Shakespeare, which I just think is so cool. So this is honestly like the perfect book to pick up in September. I feel like dark academia for me is like the perfect subgenre for September. So if you guys haven't read If We Were Villains, I'm sure you guys have seen this around. I would highly recommend, especially if you didn't like The Secret History. I didn't, and I loved this one. So please read it. It's so good. And then I have another book, which I'm sure you guys are aware of, but I'm putting it on this list because going into this book, I did not realize how autumnal feeling this book was. And I just need everybody to know it before they jump into this book. Maybe you guys already knew and I was just late to knowing this information. But The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I had no clue that this was such an autumnal read. And the fact that I read it in July, criminal, honestly. But how do I describe The Night Circus? Basically, it follows this circus which arrives without warning, and we're kind of following our 2 main characters, Marco and Celia, who have been thrust into this lifelong magical competition. And this book follows them throughout the years as they are partaking in this competition, kind of getting to know their opponent a little bit better. But the plot is not really the reason that I absolutely love this book. It is the writing. Like, it's just so beautiful, so stunning, so atmospheric. Like, if you want to feel like you are at a magical circus, if you want to feel like you are experiencing the things that the characters are feeling, Erin Morgenstern's writing is going to do that for you. I know she is not an unknown author, but like, this is me imploring you to pick up her books because I love both of them so dearly. The Starless Sea is obviously my favorite, but that's a very wintry book, but like this one is the autumnal book. I had to start a tab in this book for all of the beautiful autumnal imagery and whatnot. It's just so good. There's also a little part that takes place on Halloween. Oh, I want to do a reread. I'm not going to do a reread this year. I will eventually. And then the last book that I have in this category is kind of like a series recommendation, but I want to talk about the second book specifically, and that is Emily Wilde's Map of the Other Lands. I read this book back in February, and again, why am I reading such autumnal coded books in the wrong months? I don't know. It makes me sad. But this book is so autumnal, so beautiful, so lovely. But the first book in the series is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. That book is very wintry leaning, so like maybe not the best recommendation. But if you've read that one and you haven't read the second one, this is me telling you to read the second one this fall. Because the beginning of this book does take place in Cambridge, because that's where our 2 main characters are professors. And the descriptions of Cambridge in the fall is just stunning and beautiful. I do love it. And then they end up kind of going on this expedition to the Alps, and that is beautiful as well. If you guys don't know, basically this series is following our main character, Emily Wilde, as she is putting together these academic things, you know? In the first one, she's writing an encyclopedia. In this one, she is constructing a map of the other lands. And the third book, which comes out next February, I think, she's putting together a compendium of tales, which I cannot wait for that one. But this one has been my favorite of the series so far. Please read it. Like, read the first book and then read this one and then get ready for the third one with me because it's gonna be so good. Next is a book that I read rather recently, but I absolutely loved it, and that is In the Company of Witches by Orly Wallace. This is a cozy mystery that has witches in it, which is a subsection of cozy mysteries that I need to check out for sure. Basically, this is following our main character, who is a witch that lives with her 2 aunts who are also witches. So very Sabrina the Teenage Witch in that aspect. I also feel like she's got some kooky aunts, which is also very Sabrina the Teenage Witch-esque. But they own this B&B, and one day a woman who has rented out the entire B&B because she does not want to stay there while anybody else is staying there, she drops dead in one of their rooms, and one of the aunts is kind of being framed for the murder. So the entirety of this book is following our main character Bryn as she is trying to clear her aunt's name, solve the mystery. She's also kind of working through some issues of her own because her husband passed away, and you kind of watch her dealing with that grief and how it's cropping up in essentially everything she does. I feel like it's a really good mix of this like fun murder mystery with kind of a character exploration of everything that Bryn's been going through. This is just peak coziness, honestly. If you like Sabrina the Teenage Witch and if you like Gilmore Girls, I would highly recommend this book. Then I do have a couple of vampire books because obviously I do love a good vampire book. The first one being Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. I read this one last year and I really enjoyed it. It's just a very interesting take on vampires and something that I don't normally pick up because a lot of the vampire media that I consume is ridiculous and I am very aware of that. Like, I love a good teen drama with vampires in it that, oh, so good, so fun. But this is kind of a more serious take on vampires and I really enjoyed it for that. This is following our main character Louis, who gets turned into a vampire. And basically this entire book is a character who I believe is unnamed having an interview with this vampire, and we learn all about his life from the time before he was turned to the modern day when this book is taking place. I feel like it has a lot of really interesting discussions on immortal life that I don't really get in a lot of the vampire media that I personally like to consume. So it was just something really new for me, something I really enjoyed. I'm really excited to continue on with the series. I do have the second one ready to go for October. Very intrigued to see how I think of that one because it does follow a character that I hate. But, you know, maybe he'll get redeemed. But maybe he won't. I don't know. We'll see. And then the other vampire book that I have is a shorty because it is Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. This is a vampire classic that was written, I think, about 20 years before Dracula was. And it follows our main character Laura, who is in this like isolated mansion. There's a little illustration. Let me show it to you. Look at this. Oh. That's so cool. But our main character Laura lives in this mansion. It is very remote, very isolated. And one day she is visited by this person whose name is Carmilla, and some weird things start to happen, as they normally do in a vampire story. I loved the overtly sapphic undertones to this story. I loved the writing. I feel like it's also just really interesting as well to see what authors can do with a novella, because like Dracula is like 450 pages or something. So to read a vampire story from that time period that's only about 100 pages, I really enjoyed. It's not like a favorite, but I think it's definitely a required read if you are into vampires. Then I do have a little short story, and that is The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. I absolutely love this story. Like, it is not fall/Halloween time until I read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. This book is following our main character Ichabod Crane, who moves into this small town that has kind of an urban legend to it almost. And that is obviously the legend of the Headless Horseman. It is said that if you ride through these woods at night, the Headless Horseman is gonna hunt you down and kill you, obviously. And we kind of see how that affects Ichabod going forward. But the main thing that I absolutely love about this book is the writing. Like, I have never witnessed such autumnal writing. I absolutely love it. I have a copy of this that I have annotated so much. There are just so many lines that I'm like, yes, all of this, it's so beautiful. It's always talking about how like spooky everything is. It talks about the beautiful leaves. It talks about the harvest, like just... It's only like 30 pages. I'd recommend. And then the last kind of recommendation that I have in the adult section is a short story collection, and that is The October Country by Ray Bradbury. Ray Bradbury is honestly one of my favorite authors, but I don't talk about him a lot. But if you want a spooky, atmospheric story for fall, he has so many good books. Obviously, you could pick up Something Wicked This Way Comes, not a personal favorite of mine, but very autumnal. You could also read The Halloween Tree, which is like a YA middle grade kind of story that goes through somewhat the origins of Halloween, but this one is a short story collection containing a bunch of stories that take place in October, which is obviously the perfect read for me. There are a couple of these which I absolutely just thought were so weird. My favorite one, and the one that sticks out the most to me still, even though I read this like 4 years ago, is called The Small Assassin, which is where this couple just had this child and they bring it home, and I think it's the husband is like convinced that this child is going to murder him. Like, this 3-week-old infant. He's like, he's coming for me. Like, I know he's gonna get me. And still, like, even thinking about it, it's just like kind of funny, but very entertaining. And there are so many other good stories in here that I really enjoyed, so I think I have some of them marked. Which ones did I like? Oh, The Emissary. The Emissary is a good one. It kind of gives Pet Sematary vibes, even though this might have been written before Pet Sematary. But I love Ray Bradbury's autumnal writing, so hopefully you will too. I do have one of his books on my fall TBR, which is... what's that book called? I cannot remember what it's called. It's this one. It's like on top of my shelves. I cannot see the title, but that one. I'm gonna read it and hopefully it'll be great. So moving on from the adult recommendations, I do have a couple of YA reads that I really enjoyed. The first one being An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. I know a lot of people really love Sorcery of Thorns, which I also love Sorcery of Thorns. But this one has the most beautiful and vivid autumnal scenery descriptions that I have ever witnessed in a book. Like, I read this book on audio a couple of years ago and I would always listen to it while I was going on walks in the woods. And it was such an immersive experience. I felt like I was there with the character. It was just so good. And I don't know if it was just my reading experience that makes me love this book so much, but it also does just have beautiful scenery in it. And it deals with the Fae, which is like a couple of points in this book's favor. Basically, this book is following our main character, what's her name? Isabel? Yeah. Who is a painter, and she typically paints portraits for the Fae, but one day she gets commissioned to paint a portrait for a fairy prince, I believe. And the Fae in this book are very vain. They're very soulless feeling almost, but she ends up painting this emotion into his eyes that he does not like. And the Fae end up wanting to put her on trial for this basically, and I don't know, arrest her, kill her, something. I don't remember. But honestly, the plot in this book, not that important. I really just love it because of the descriptions, because of the atmosphere that Margaret Rogerson is able to craft. It is so good. I like the depiction of the Fae in this story because they are very sinister beings, and I love it when a book portrays fairies in that light because it is very true to how they are traditionally portrayed in folklore, so I loved that as well. But this is just a book that screams fall to me. Then I have a recent read which I think would be perfect for September specifically, and that is The Library of Shadows by Rachel Moore. Sorry, this is so shiny. It's the library copy. So we're just gonna set that down now. But this book is following our main character Este, who gets admitted to this very elusive, isolated preparatory academy. And she's mainly going there because her father used to go there and her father passed away a couple of years ago, so she's kind of trying to find any connection to him that she can. But when she gets there, she discovers this key among her things that she did not know was there, and it kind of leads her into a whole lot of trouble, basically. There are ghosts, secret passageways, haunted libraries. Honestly, what more could you ask? It very much gave me that back to school, middle of September kind of feeling almost. It felt very nostalgic in a way, I guess. There's also a cute little romance to it, so it's just a really fun read for the fall. It's a really fun and fast read, so if you're looking for something to read in a day that gives you like a nice atmospheric kind of feeling, I'd recommend this one. Then I do have two books by Crystal Sutherland, which Crystal Sutherland might be one of my favorite like autumnal authors at this point because I have absolutely loved both of her books that I've read. The first one being The Invocations. I read this one earlier this year. I gave this book a 5 stars, one of my only 5-star books of the year. I just absolutely loved it. This is following our 3 main characters who are all kind of involved with witchcraft in some way, and they find their way together to essentially track down and stop this supernatural serial killer. It's just so fun, but it's also so creepy at the same time. Like, there are some descriptions in this that I had a visceral reaction to, not because they're scary, but just because they're kind of gross. But I really loved the dynamic between our 3 main characters. I think the way that they kind of found their way to each other and begin working together is just really entertaining to read about. I also love the discussion in this book of just the experience of being a woman, basically, because the supernatural killer has been targeting women who have somehow gotten involved with witchcraft because they didn't feel safe in their own lives, which obviously makes me sad, but like as a woman, obviously, I can relate to that so deeply. Like, the very first chapter of this book follows this girl who's walking home alone at night. And like, if you're a woman, you know that experience. You know what that's like. You know how scary that is. So to kind of see it portrayed the way it is in this book, I just really enjoyed. I also really love the fact that this book takes place around Halloween. Like, this would be the perfect Halloween time read. I implore you to pick this book up in October specifically. The atmosphere is there, the creep factor is there, it's just all so good. So I really loved this one. And then I also really loved House of Hollow, which I read last year. This book kind of focuses on the disappearance of these 3 sisters that happened a long time ago. So this book kind of focuses on those 3 sisters as they are all grown up, but one of their sisters does end up disappearing again, and it is up to the other 2 sisters to figure out where she went. This book, again, is just really unsettling, really eerie. I would never call these books like scary, but they have this like slow, earthy kind of nature horror vibe to them, which I absolutely love. Then I do have two middle grade series, which I'm sure I've recommended these before, so I'm not gonna talk about them too much, but like they are my favorite middle grade series. They are so much fun. The first one being the Small Spaces series by Katherine Arden. This is a quartet, and the fourth book I believe came out last year maybe, so it's a complete series. And it is following our three main characters as they get into a lot of spooky situations, basically. The first one takes place in a cornfield, the second one takes place in an abandoned ski lodge, the third one takes place on a lake, which I know doesn't sound that spooky, but it is. And the fourth one, I don't know where it takes place, but I know there's a clown in it. So really that's all you need to know going into this series. It's fun. It is very spooky in parts. They're all really fast, atmospheric. I think the first one is probably my favorite just because it takes place in a corn maze, and obviously that's fun, but they're all great. And then I also would like to recommend the Cassidy Blake series by Victoria Schwab. I feel like, I mean, obviously V. Schwab is a very big author, but I don't see a lot of people talking about this series really, so I love this series. Basically, it is following our main character, Cassidy, whose parents are paranormal investigators, so they kind of get to go a lot of different places in the world. But our main character, Cassidy, can actually talk to ghosts, and she has this ghost best friend whose name is Jacob, I think. And the series follows her as she goes to a couple of different places. I believe the first one takes place in Edinburgh, the second one, Paris, and the third one, New Orleans. I could have those out of order, I'm not sure. But you're following her in those places as she interacts with all of the ghosts of the area, and you kind of see her coming into this role that she never knew she needed to take on. And then lastly, I do have a couple of graphic novel recommendations for you guys because I love a good graphic novel. The first one being Garlic and the Vampire by Brie Paulson. I read this one last year and I absolutely loved it. It is so fun. Basically, you're following all of these little anthropomorphic vegetable people, and they realize there is this kind of mansion on the hill that seems to be inhabited, and they're all kind of thinking there's a vampire in there, which is obviously seemingly an issue. So what a better vegetable to go kind of suss out the situation and figure out what's going on than garlic. This is just delightful, honestly. I mean, like, look at these little illustrations. They're so freaking cute. And it's a book about overcoming your fears, dealing with your anxiety, just doing things you never thought you could do. And I loved it. There's also a second one in the series, which I don't love quite as much, but it's still fun. It's called Garlic and the Witch. But this one is my favorite. Then we also have Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. This is kind of like a short story collection almost. There are 5 different stories in this that are all like taking place in the woods, basically. Actually, do they take place in the woods? I feel like maybe a couple of them do. But I absolutely love Emily Carroll's art style. I also love the color palette for this one because it's all like black, white, and blue, which is really interesting. And I don't know how to talk about these stories necessarily, but it's just spooky. It's fun. I'd recommend. Another graphic novel which I absolutely love is Hollow. I don't remember who the authors are of this one, but there's 3 of them. I'll put it on the screen. And this one is following our main character Izzy, who just moved to Sleepy Hollow. Also, you'll be able to see Winnie walking around. Do you want to say hi? She always does. Oh, you're purring. She's never this happy when I pick her up. So she moves to town and she makes friends, I believe, with the descendants of Brom and Katrina from like the original story. And they're working together to break the curse of the Headless Horseman because he has been haunting people in this town, and they have until like Halloween to break it or something to that effect. And again, I just thoroughly enjoyed this graphic novel. I really liked how it kind of subverted my expectations. I really enjoyed the art style as well. I don't have a physical copy of it, but it is beautiful. So again, just a fun, quick graphic novel if you're looking for one of those. And then my very last recommendation is, again, kind of something that not everybody will be able to read. But if you like Over the Garden Wall, then this one is for you. If you've seen the show and you have not read Over the Garden Wall Distillatoria before, I implore you to do so if you can. I know that this is really hard to get a hold of because it did go out of print a while ago. I personally, when I first read this, I borrowed the ebook of it from my library, so if you can check there, I would recommend. Basically, this book is following Wirt and Greg after the events of the Over the Garden Wall TV show as they are trying to help Beatrice return home. It also takes place on Halloween. Again, this would be a really good one to read like on the day of Halloween. So yes, those are all of my fall, autumnal, spooky, scary, cozy, whatever recommendations for you guys. I really hope you found something that you liked in this video. I know not all of these are like books you've never heard of before, but like they are just my favorite fall reads that I would highly recommend. Weenie would also recommend them. Wouldn't you? Oh, you're so cute. But yeah, I think that is everything that I have to say. I feel like I've kept you here long enough, so thank you so much for watching. Obviously, I would love to know down below if any of these appealed to you. Are you gonna check any of them out? Or if you have any fall recommendations for me, I would love to hear them. But also before we go, I would like to thank everybody over on my Patreon. If you are ever looking for more content from me, that is always linked down below. We do some fun stuff. I do a monthly buddy read, extra videos, journaling content. We are doing a readathon in October, which should be really fun. So if you want to come and join us, you totally could. But with that, I'm gonna go because the sun is slowly creeping into my eyes. So I hope you're all having an amazing Monday or whatever it is that you're watching this video. And I will see you all in my next one. Bye. Winnie also says bye. She's in, oh, you're so cute. Okay, bye.